Welcome to the Geological Wayfaring the Future series. This is a special series of conversations that we are releasing in addition to our regular Tuesday podcasts. The reason being, the acupuncture and East Asian medical profession is facing a critical number of challenges as schools close. New federal guidelines on graduate education loans will dramatically change how much students can borrow. Beyond that is the issue of eroding insurance payments, and while acupuncture is increasingly integrating into the conventional system, acupuncturists are not. What are some ways we might move through the troubles of these times? That is what this series is for. We'll be listening to the perspectives and voices of practitioners who have been engaging the challenges. It's not always comfortable having conversations around difficult or contentious topics, but listening to understand, that's a good place to begin.
I fear that sometimes when we have institutions, we build accrediting bodies and certifying bodies and all these colleges, that people come into a landscape where they think like it's all built for you. And I think the profession is actually going to need to get really savvy at promoting our value within the U.S. healthcare system.
The acupuncture profession has always existed in a kind of creative tension. From its early days when practitioners were working to establish legal recognition and create educational standards to the present moment where questions about training, debt, and professional identity are impossible to ignore. You could say that we've been building the plane while flying it. In this conversation with Valerie Hobbs, we take a look at some of the forces that have shaped the landscape we live in today. We explore the historical roots of the profession, the long-running debate over doctoral education, and the assumption that more hours of training necessarily produces better practitioners. We also discuss the unintended consequences of Grad Plus loans, which expanded access to education, but also contributed to levels of student debt that have become a nationwide problem. Perhaps most importantly, we consider whether the challenges facing the profession represent a process of deconstruction or an opportunity for innovation. This conversation is a look at where we've come from, where we are now, and what might help us to navigate the road ahead. Valerie Hobbs, welcome to Geological.
Thank you, Michael. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. This is part of our wayfinding series. There are some things happening in our profession. Well, there's always something happening in a profession, but we're in a particularly potent moment, I guess I would call it. And so there's a lot of discussion about where things are going. And I'd like to talk with you a little bit about where things are going and also to some degree how we got here, because you've been in the profession a long time. You've been working in the educational portion quite a bit. You have a lot of background, and I want to be able to tap in a bit to your institutional knowledge of what's going on.
Okay. So shall we start a little bit with acquainting your readers with that history?
Yes, I would love some history, especially... Look, I've got a history series here on the podcast, and I've had guests on who were part of starting the original NCCA. That was before it became NCCAOM. We have a profession that bootstrapped itself into existence, which is kind of cool when you think about it.
Yes, and I guess as a healthcare provider profession, we're the newest kid on the block. So, chiropractors had to do the same thing, but they did it 50 years earlier than we did.
Mm-hmm.
And the other allied health professions like physical therapy and audiology and occupational therapy started a little earlier and had a lot more institutional and inside U.S. healthcare support than we had as we built our profession. We really built ourselves on the outside
Totally.
so that our
And proud of
practitioners,
it.
yeah, and so that our practitioners wouldn't go to jail. I mean, that was the reality, right? Because if you speak to, the elders in our profession, the Bob Flaws, if we could talk to Miriam Lee, if we could,
Jake Fratkin.
Jake
We had Jake
Fratkin.
Fratkin on the show. He talked about being handcuffed and led to jail.
Yes, because they were providing healing to other human beings, and Western doctors have the market on being able to treat people for physical conditions unless you have a practice act. And so organizing ourselves to the point where we could get a practice act and some legitimacy was about being able to survive as practitioners.
Yes, indeed. Can you give us a little background on just what I keep wanting to say NCCOM because I've said it for so many years, but it's now the NCBOM or NCBOM, what they do and what the accreditor, the ACOM does. I've seen at times in different discussion groups complaints, quite frankly, about, the NCBOM, they're not advocating well enough for us. They're not creating jobs for us. And at least as I understand it, that's not their job. Their job is to do testing. It's not to do advocacy. But maybe I've got that wrong. If you could just lay the groundwork for us, let the listeners know what these entities do and what we can expect of them. What's their, I guess you could say, scope of practice?
Sure. So, in any profession, you have 4 pillars that hold up the profession. And one arm is a certifying board for our level of practice in order to ensure public safety, that people aren't going to harm other people, that they know enough to be able to advertise themselves as a practitioner and start taking patients. The other pillar is the educational community, and that community was the first thing that organized in our profession as sort of a body that could bring experts together and then think about what are the other pillars that we need. So we have accreditors, we have the community of colleges, and then we have the profession itself. And we've had a series of state organizations, and sometimes in states there are 2 organizations, but our profession a long time ago was a little bit split along the lines of what is inclusive in the practice of acupuncture. And there was a feeling that it had to be acupuncture and herbs. And there was a different arm of the profession that felt, no, it doesn't necessarily have to be exclusive to that. And they were at loggerheads to each other for a long time and eventually faded away. And then the current ASA is the organization that is an umbrella group of representing state associations. And so that professional voice within the profession, that professional pillar, has kind of morphed and changed over time. They all have different roles and they should be distinct from one another. They kind of weren't necessarily in the beginning because what is now the Council of Colleges actually gave rise to the certification board, the NCBOM, and also gave rise to the accrediting body, ACOM. And eventually, in the maturation of those bodies, they really need to be distinctly different because they can't represent the interests of the colleges only. They have to answer to other stakeholders. But in the beginning, they were sort of spun off from the Council of Colleges.
And what was the Council of Colleges in the beginning?
I think it actually was, everybody got rid of the O word in their acronyms, but I think for a long time it was the Council of Colleges of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine. And it was in the early 80s, and I was not involved in the Council of Colleges in the early 80s. My introduction into that body came shortly after I became licensed and employed by the first college I worked for. and I was their representative to the Council of Colleges since 1999. So I sat around the tables where people were talking about, should we have a doctorate, should we not, what should the standards be, what is a post-level doctorate, what are the competencies that students should be learning. I was there before their biomedicine exam or a module. And so I have been an active participant in the discussions about increasing standards in the profession since that time. So the role of a certifying board is primarily to protect public safety. And so they do psychometric analysis on what the profession feels that is important for an entry level practitioner in terms of knowledge, skills, and competencies they need to have. And then they create the content of certifying exams that have to be fair and psychometrically valid. And their certification body then communicates to a state regulatory body that this person who has gone through a certain amount of education has demonstrated that they have the knowledge and skill to be licensed. And so they're the bridge to legal practice. I don't know about the claim that they should be doing more for our profession because they have a very distinct role and need to really concentrate on that. I do serve on their professional ethics and disciplinary committee, and I've been on that committee since 2002. And the kinds of things that we hear about are practitioners who make unfortunate and sometimes really bad choices as human beings. So it is the practitioner who actually has chosen to perhaps assault his patient or her patient, or the practitioner who now has a problem with substance abuse, or the practitioner who has just violated ethics by overclaiming what they can do and not following the code of ethics. So that's a really important part about what NICBOM does.
Well, that's a piece of public safety.
That's a piece of public safety.
I can see how that would fit in totally.
That fits totally in. And when there are cases, it happens in all health professions. There are, state licensing boards grapple with bad decision makers. All national boards deal with bad decision makers. But when we have a patchwork of state laws, you can imagine that it could be a situation where someone in some state demonstrates behavior that makes them no longer safe to be in rooms with vulnerable patients. And they move to another state and set up a shop there and do the same kinds of untoward, unethical, and sometimes completely traumatic and harmful things. And so as a profession sort of looking after the bad actors or the bad choices, let's not pin it on people, but their choices. It is important for us to be able to say, no, there are certain actions that you take that mean you should not be a healthcare provider. And so that's an important function of theirs.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because when I think of the NCBOM, I think of, license portability. I can practice in this state, I can practice in that state, I can take the standards and knowledge that I have, and there's this process. Any state that accepts it, I can go there and work. Likewise, what I hear you saying is anyone who is behaving badly, you behave bad in one state, you're not going to be able to go perpetrate this in another. And I hadn't thought about that side of it.
This is really rare. I mean, we have to say, in fact, it's so rare that in some states when licensure comes up, renewal of acupuncture licensure comes up. This happened in my state of Colorado when we got licensure in the early 2000s. Was the question from the committee was, there's so few complaints about you acupuncturists, why do we go to the money of having a licensing board? And we could...
That's an interesting thing. That's a great question, isn't it?
It's an interesting thing, but we are not... It is, human free will is an odd thing. And human free will still shows its underbelly at times. And even though it's rare, you definitely want to have the processes in place to answer that rarity swiftly and completely.
So in essence, the NCBOM, it is for safety, it is for ensuring that people have the minimal requirements to practice safely. That's their job. That's the service that they provide. We shouldn't ask for really things beyond that because that's what they do.
That is what they do, but they have been advocates for the profession. So in the middle, the 2010s, there comes along an issue about the fact that acupuncturists were not recognized by the Department of Labor as a profession. And in order to get recognition, like everybody signs on their tax form, you get to have that little number code that says acupuncture. That didn't used to exist. And the reason it exists is because of the efforts of Nick Baum in promoting acupuncture as a profession within the U.S. government. And so they really did have a focus and a charge at one time, since they were at that time the largest representation of certified acupuncturists in the country, to be able to file petitions with the U.S. Department of Labor in order to get that designation. So they've done advocacy. It just seems like maybe their advocacy is maybe more behind the scenes that we know. So they will advocate in a state as well, but they'll only do it if a state professional association requires their assistance and asks them for the help. So rightfully, advocacy locally belongs with the profession, I think, and professional associations. But I wouldn't characterize the National Association as not advocating strongly for our profession.
Okay. What does the accreditor do? What's their role in all of this?
The role of an accreditor is to set academic standards very much in line with the skills and knowledge that practitioners would expect to have as they enter into practice. And accreditors will set standards for the governance of an institution that has an acupuncture program. They'll set standards for dissemination of information back. They have a large role in how decisions are made and structured. My original acupuncture program was done in the days before accreditation was required to sit the certifying exam. So that wasn't always the case.
So now you have to go to an accredited school to be able to sit for the licensure test.
For the licensure test, and that was not always true. And it makes sense if in 1982 or 3 you're barely starting these institutional bodies and they're starting to organize themselves and developing their standards. Requiring that everybody goes to an accredited school is a little bit before the time, but as a profession is going to progress, that is the way professions progress. You wouldn't think of a physical therapist that didn't go to an accredited college. For our colleges to be forced to be accredited 5 years after they were founded, when there weren't very many textbooks published, just that would be not realistic.
Right. So it's a developmental thing, just like with human beings. There are certain things that you're not capable of, and then you reach a certain level of maturation. You're not only capable of it, but you should be doing it.
You should be doing it. And the conversation around the table at the Council of College has been about what do we think the standards are, and the long conversations and debates about that, and also to sort of educate the community of colleges about the best practices in an educational institution. And so there probably was a lot patchier landscape about the quality of education in 1980s, 1990s than you're going to find in the 2010s or today.
Sure. It's more the wild, wild west in the beginning.
Yeah. So now schools have to, they have to meet certain standards. They have to deliver certain curriculum. They have to communicate to the students their uniqueness and what they do and what their policies are. Students who are different, who have neurological differences in the way that they learn, can get accommodations within a program. All those things come as a virtue of setting the standards. So where we get into this sort of idea that these bodies are, the institutions that get pushed back on a lot is that it is also pretty typical in the development of a profession that there aren't going to be 5 certifying bodies and there aren't going to be 5 accreditors, and there'll be multiple colleges, but these oversight agencies have to get recognition by government agencies in order to do the work they do. And they are in some ways gatekeepers. So I'd say the NICBOM is a gatekeeper to people entering practice that protects the public. ACOM is the gatekeeper that ensures the federal government that an educational institution is organized and structured in such a way that they meet standards so that when the government confers loans to their students, there is a reasonable expectation that the business will be conducted properly.
Yes. Well, which brings us to the conversation of the day. Student loans, they changed in 2005. They went from lower caps, lower amounts, less interest rate too, to higher interest rate, more money. Seems like the entire educational system got a jolt of more money, not just the acupuncture community, but the entire educational industrial complex.
Yeah, there is a feeling, I don't know if it's an actuality, but there is definitely a feeling that there's this money-making machine behind it, right? Now, I have not noticed that people at colleges who run colleges, a lot of colleges are nonprofit, even the for-profit colleges, the people sitting around the table are, quite concerned about the increases in education. Imagine if you have to be accredited and now you have to have specialized administrators who have an education in human resources, and you have to have specialized administrators who have knowledge of accreditation standards and processes, and you have to have the course design people that can help your faculty to deliver their assessments in a structured way. It does make things more expensive.
Well, of course it does, because you need infrastructure to support a structure. And look, fair enough. Folks that are drawn to things like acupuncture, as Kathleen Lumiere said, we're kind of iconoclastic. We're kind of rebels. We're the people that push against systems rather than make systems, and generally speaking. But look, if you're going to have a system that helps teach people and prepare them for a trade in the healthcare services, you got to do your homework, and you've got to do a good job. So, all that's there. I think we're looking at a particularly curious flashpoint right now. The money that we've been awash in is being turned off. We're finding some people are coming out with student loans. Wow, they can really balloon up high.
Yes, I have one myself. So I feel like I'm sitting here trying to be, like I'm sounding like I'm an advocate for the way things are. And I just want to explain the history of how that developed. I'm not a disadvocate either.
I hear you. And I have found, at least in my personal life, and I've seen this in organizations I've been a part of as well, there are things that get put in place at a certain point, and it's a really good idea, and it solves a problem. But as a friend of mine likes to say, all solutions are temporary. So the thing that was a great idea at one point in time, the thing that solved a problem, and it solved it very well, you get further down the road, it doesn't solve the problem. In fact, it might even be part of the problem.
And it might close us off from innovative ways to do something differently that we can't conceive of because we're all going down this road that is supported by a lot of other kinds of institutional stuff in America. Like it's supported by the way that U.S. education is created and built and supported, and it is supported by the way U.S. healthcare is created and built and supported. We would not have acupuncturists hired in the VA if we didn't have accreditation standards in the certification, and frankly, if we hadn't increased education hours. And the highest credentialed people in the VA tend now to be getting doctorates, which people have been doing for, let's say, almost 20 years with the postgraduate and now the entry level. And it was a huge debate. I sat at a table in 1999 and people were debating over doctorates. I watched administrators at different schools have like shouting matches at each other about whether we should go to doctorates or not. And that increased expense.
What were the issues of the day with that? What were people looking at that moment as doctorates were being created, the pluses and the minuses? What was being seen?
In part, comes from the status and respect that we get from our patients. The way that patients treat us and the fact that we were independent providers. A lot of other allied healthcare until 2010, 2012, 2015 were not independent providers. You'd have to get a prescription from your doctor to go to a physical therapist. The physical therapist community developed doctorates as a vision for themselves to be independent providers and sort of on par with chiropractors and medical doctors, etc.
And acupuncturists, for that matter.
Well, and to be independent providers, but our patients might come to us with that respect. We might actually look at the healthcare, our place in healthcare as this independent providers. And frankly, many of our teachers who imported this medicine from China were given that status in China, come to the United States or Korea or Japan, and come to the United States under those HB1 visas, and they're like this second class, not respected, not have the status that they had in their original country, and they're bringing their rich tradition and their education and giving it to us, and yet they're not treated with the same kind of economic opportunities or integrative opportunities that they have in their home countries. So this original schism came up in separate states where the state acupuncture associations had a vision for a higher level of practice and integration among other U.S. healthcare providers. It happened a little bit in Nevada, but it really happened in California. So California practitioners in the early 2000s revised their educational criteria so that they increased their hours dramatically. And their first step was to go to a 3,000 hour requirement. And they had full intention and have had several attempts to go to a 4,000 hour requirement. So this 4,000 hours is a magic number because it has often been kind of quoted as the number that got chiropractors doctoral status. And the 4,000 hour wasn't quite what happened in other allied health as things progressed. It wasn't quite that high. But this, and frankly, MD hours are way over 4,000 hours. But this was the dedicated postgraduate 4-year 4,000 hour program was the standard to get doctoral status. The other critical thing that had to happen was the publication of textbooks and the implementation of research, because we really when Whit Reeves went to Southwest Acupuncture College, there were 2 books in print. That's that development fueled the scholarship that would support the kinds of doctoral level classes. So the state of California pushed really hard, and there were, kind of behind the scenes kind of attitudes that, well, if the educational community, because ACOM as a body just didn't want to say that the education had to be at a doctoral level. They felt like they had gotten to a master's level and that master's level practitioners were perfectly safe and providing good care. And that we could see the growth of the profession may include doctoral level education, but for most of the colleges in other states, in other economies than the state of California, sort of increasing this number of hours with the increasing cost to the student was not seen as something that ACOM wanted to do. And I don't think people really understand that. So the state of California just sort of did it. They did it legislatively. And because the state of California has a different route to licensure where you have to get approval for your education in California in order to sit for their licensing exam, colleges all over the country, in order to be competitive and attract a student who may want to be able to be licensed anywhere in the country eventually, had to be California.
They would have to meet the California
They
standard.
would have to meet the California standard, even if it wasn't the ACOM standard or the standard in their own state.
Right. And California loves regulation, it seems.
It seems that way. I think that, from what I know of California, they have medical boards that don't necessarily, and I don't want to say this flippantly or derogatorily, but they don't play nice with other states. And so they set themselves up as a standard because what they believe, what they're telling themselves, is that they have the highest standard and the best practitioners in the country.
And the rest of the country should follow their
And
lead.
the rest of the country should follow their lead, which happened for a really long time. Like ACOM standards were at once 1,800-hour programs, and it was torturous meetings to get up to 2,800 hours. And they kind of capped it at 2,800 hours because what developed first was the postgraduate doctorate, the DAOM programs. And so what was envisioned was that these 2,800-hour entry-level programs would then be supplemented with 1,200-hour postgraduate programs, and you'd come up to that magical number of 4,000 hours. I didn't know we were going to talk about so much math today, but here we are.
Well, you just never know. Now, okay, this is interesting. One of the things, and look, I love being an acupuncturist. I've had a good run over the past 30-ish years doing this work. I'm glad I've been able to do it. I'm glad I got into it when I did. This was the mid-90s. It seems to me that when we ask for higher and higher levels of education, I'm going to say beyond what, I'm not going to call it a bare minimum, but I'm going to call it a safe minimum. It's like in amusement parks back in the day, you had to be this tall to ride this ride, okay? And for someone who just might want to go out and practice, they might not be interested in research. They're not interested in working in integrative care. In fact, the idea of going out and working in their own clinic is why they want to do it. To get an education of 4,000 hours to do that is like you're not going to be tall, like you can't get that tall to ride that ride if you don't have the money and the time to do it. So, for me, I like to think of myself as a very democratic person. Like, let's get everybody involved. If you want to do it, come do it, right? It's a big tent. Join us. But there's different levels that I suspect make you good enough to get started.
Yes. So we're talking about sort of two separate roads, two separate opinions, because there has been this sort of way that professional voices have been expressing what should happen in kind of like these ideas are common to their scenario. It should be all herbs and acupuncture. It should be doctoral level training. You should have a bachelor's degree before you get into it. It should be a 4,000-hour program. And that's what it means to be an acupuncturist. And then there is this other voice that says, no, wait a minute. I may be doing a different tradition than what came out of communist China. And I work quite well within that tradition, and I'm not going to do herbs in my practice. And I can work with a master's degree, and I don't agree that everybody else should do the path that I'm doing. And so we have this sort of professional voice that has been at loggerheads with each other for decades about what the profession should be. And there are some places in strong legislatures where they have, the number of hours has been increasing and increased and increased, and the idea that makes a more qualified practitioner. This is what I would call we've been duped number one. Like we've been duped.
Number one. We've been duped number
We've been
one.
duped,
It sounds
number
like
one.
there's more.
There's a few more. The duping number
Okay.
one is that an increase in hours makes a better practitioner. I agree that there are certain things a practitioner really needs to know that maybe I didn't get in my original program pre-accreditation that I got in continuing education, and then I got a accredited master's and I got an accredited doctorate, and I could see along the way that, oh, this is what doctors do. I get it. So now I understand that was not exposed to that nuance. Thank goodness I wanted to do that because it met my career goals, right?
Hmm.
But the dupe number,
And you grew into
and I
it.
grew into it, but the dupe number one is that everybody has to increase their hours so that we can have a higher standard. And this is the question number one. Are we really creating higher standards by increasing our hours? And I think what people should know is that that question is alive and well within our accrediting body and has been there all this time. I was one of those voices who spoke the most strongly about it. And I'll give you an example. When the entry-level doctorate came out, there was just this sort of idea that you had to graduate from your institution with doing 2 years of your final education at that institution. And it kind of made me feel like, well, what if somebody really has to move across the country? Aging parents, they got to take care of them. They're in another state. They've got to transfer to another school. Do you mean they have to they're in their last year? Do you mean that they have to repeat the last year of their program, another year that they've already done because they have to spend 2 years? We think that's a higher standard, and it turns out that's not a higher standard. And now ACOM has rolled that back to allow a little bit more flexibility for people who have to change locations.
In other words, more is not necessarily gooder.
No, more is not necessarily gooder. They are now grappling with the question, do you have to have a bachelor's degree? And I can remember sitting at a table and really duking it out verbally with other very respected people in the field that, of course, if you're a doctor, you have a bachelor's degree. And I would just kind of want to say, I understand that that's the model within the medical professions, is that serve people who come into our profession. And so we're now seeing, the new survey out by ACOM, they're floating this idea within sort of the removal of the professional designation by the U.S. government and the attendant cap on loans, that maybe some of our education could be done at a bachelor's level and completed at a master's level. And so these are good questions to come up. Like, why are we steering the ship just in one way? Because that's the way we've already gone. I think that's an issue.
Okay. So that's dupe number one. More hours means you're a better practitioner. Thank you, California. Right? And maybe an echo from the chiropractors because of the magic 4,000.
And not even so much from the PTs. You look at PT doctorate programs, they're not at 4,000 hours. So that's dupe number one.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get to dupe number two?
Yeah, I think we should do two before we do three.
Well, I'm not sure there is a third. I might realize that I've got a dupe number three in me, but dupe number two is sort of the big one. I'll relate this to something that happened in my state of Colorado. Colorado is a state where we have a scope of practice that includes injection therapy. And we got it really early, like in 1999. And one of the reasons that we got it was that a school that I happened to work for, Southwest Acupuncture College, had it in their curriculum in New Mexico, and their people who were associated with that school, oh man, was that a Freudian slip in speech? I don't know. People who were involved in New Mexico also carved out the New Mexico injection therapy scope. So it was taught in the schools, and we wanted to bring it into Boulder when we got to the right part of the curriculum. And so we had to ask our regulatory agency, is it within the scope of acupuncture? And the question they asked us is it taught in your schools? Do you have it in your textbooks? And is it in research? And we could point to textbooks where, yes, it was in research, and yes, it was taught in schools around the country. And instead of having to go to the legislature and get an increase in scope, the director of the regulatory agencies in Colorado made a decision, a policy, that it was within our scope. And so we've got this idea that we gain status through having these 4 pillars, the education, the certification, the practitioners, the patient, the profession. And we thought, dupe number 2, that if we created accredited colleges, we got permission from states to deliver degrees, named degrees, that if we got our hours up to what other healthcare professions had, we fostered research, and we had certification, they would let us in the club. And they have not let us in the club.
Which club are we talking about?
We're not in U.S. healthcare. The profession is working so hard for increased status and ability to take more patients and access for more patients, inclusion in insurance. Those bills that are now championed by Judy Chu, that were originally championed by this guy named, I think his name was Hinchy Bills. He was as volunteer lobbyist long ago. They're introduced in Congress every year and they get more traction, but they don't get passed. And so this, even if we get insurance reimbursement, our hospital is really going to hire. Some are, and it's amazing that they are. And there's so much good work happening there, and more than I could have imagined 10 years ago. But we're not really included.
I've got a question about this. So first of all, I used to live in Washington State, and they've had insurance there for acupuncture since at least the mid-90s, when I first started to study. The West Coast has, in general, insurance reimbursements. I think a lot on the East Coast, not so much here in Missouri, but I haven't checked. So there is that. There's that insurance piece. There's the working within the system piece, and this is where my question is. Because I know there are some people that would like to work in this system. They want to be part of an integrated healthcare system. But I also know, and maybe it's just the crowd that I run around with, there's plenty of people, they're not interested in working in an integrated clinic. They don't want a job. They're happy to have a practice. They don't want to be a part of a system that they see as broken and flawed and abusive and, really unfair in many, many ways. So could you speak a little bit to that we as a profession, while there are people that would like to be integrated, I suspect there's a bunch of us, we're happy to have a disintegrative clinic.
Yes, and I completely disagree with the idea that we all have to, I would hope that as I think in the development of a profession, those laws will be passed. Hopefully there's opt-outs for practitioners that want to have their own practice. I don't think that people should be forced into any kind of business situation they don't want to be in. And so I am hopeful that those models will give us enough flexibility, but I have to tell you that part of the contraction that we're seeing in students coming to the profession is they want a job. They don't want to set up their own practice. When they get out of school and they have a lot of debt, they want to see that, an institution might have some kind, after a period of time, some kind of loan reduction program. They don't want to set up their own practice, and they want days off, and they want vacation, and they want health insurance, and they don't want to buy it for themselves. And so the economies that created the profession in the 80s and 90s are not the economies we exist in now. And the way that people see themselves in coming up into business or having a career are fundamentally different. And we could have seen this coming. I mean, this didn't happen in the 2020s. This happened in 2010. The decrease of people coming to acupuncture schools has been a slow leak over time.
When did we first start to see dropping in enrollment, dropping in interest of people coming to acupuncture school?
I believe that when I've seen those graphs, and even in institutions where I've worked where their high enrollments were tracked, somewhere around 2010, 2012. And I did live through a couple of interesting boosts in enrollment. Post 9/11, people decided on different careers because life was very different and shocking. And a lot of people went to acupuncture school. In 2008, when the economy got bad, people went to acupuncture school again because their professions weren't working out, and you could get loan support to go to an acupuncture school. We haven't had that kind of, there maybe was some kind of collapse around the pandemic again, but it wasn't by that time, the entire specter of higher education had reached a point and an expense where people were questioning, do I need to do that many hours? And actually looking to the credit of every voice in our profession that said, watch out, people aren't making money. And actually looking at how do these professionals do after 3 years or 5 years out of school? And by that time, we were gathering the data that, acupuncturists, by and large, outside of the state of California, because they have different supports, they have different demographics, they have state Medi-Cal. It's not the same as it is in another state, Montana.
Yeah. St. Louis,
St.
Missouri.
Louis, Missouri. The country does not have an even foundation about the way acupuncturists are going to practice.
Well, that's just endemic to being in the United States of America, where there's lots of different opinions and different states have different ways of doing things. And if you don't like it in one place, you're welcome to go somewhere else. It's part of what makes the country a unique and interesting experiment.
Right. And we have at least half our acupuncturists in a state where there's a very, I don't like to use the controlling board as a pejorative, but they're definitely not interested in having parity with the certification in the rest of the United States. And so they're going to kind of hold on to that very tightly, and they're going to hold on to their higher standard very tightly. And half our schools are there and half our practitioners are there. So the opinion that we have as practitioners, I think, is not on an even playing field. And one of the things that I think some of these conversations that you're having on your podcast and what I'm hearing from pockets of innovation and what gives me encouragement in our profession is the ability to put our personal opinion aside and to try and look objectively at what are the forces that are really guiding this. And instead of, shouting down the other opinion as loudly as we can, of kind of taking an approach that, wait a minute, maybe we need to hear all ideas. Maybe we need to back away from this is my position and I'm entrenched in it, and begin to hear about the ways that it is working or ways that it might work in innovating our way out of this instead of deconstructing our way out of this.
Ooh, okay. Innovating our way out of this versus deconstructing our way out of this. Tell me more about that. How are those different? What do those look like?
When I touch a fear point within myself about where my profession is going to go, and maybe it's part of the way that I consume information in the current administration in the United States, but I see things as everything falling down. In my worst moments, this is my perception, and because that's the voice that's loudest in my head, every time I see a falling down thing, I say, "Hey, oh, see, here you go. It's all falling down."
Mm-hmm. It's all falling
down.
And
I don't necessarily think that that's where the profession is. I think there are people and projects within the profession that look very innovative to me. I think you interviewed Kathleen Lumiere about what's happening at SEAM, and sort of thinking about that question that you asked me a little while ago. Why do we have to have a doctorate? Why can't we scaffold our degrees? Why don't people come and enter the profession at one level and work up to having a more terminal degree if they want to?
Exactly. And the reason I say that is, and this is just my own biased view of the world, that I've met people, I've known people, they've been in academics their whole life. And I look at the work they're doing in the world, they're actually not that skilled because they don't have much experience working in the world. They've got a lot of experience being in the academy. They've got a lot of experience doing the things that you do to be successful in the academy, but actually doing work, not so great. And so, and again, I'm a very hands-on sort of learner. I'm a terrible academic type learner. So at least for me, and I suspect I'm not alone in this, being able to get some work done, find out how things work, find out how things don't work, getting a sense of what the trade is, what the job is, and then going and putting some more education on top of it, man, you can really use that education. And I think it makes for a different kind of practitioner, because you're taking experience and then adding knowledge to it. If you just have a ton of knowledge and not much experience, I'm always skeptical about that. So anyway, just my biased opinion, and vote for something that gets people up and running, making money, getting experience, finding out if they even want to stay in the profession.
Yes.
Because fair enough, I remember meeting somebody at the exam that we took in San Francisco for, our licensing, NCCIOM at that time. And I met a woman who had taken the exam, and this is going to sound terrible, but I really didn't like her, because she told me about how she partied through school, and she told me about how she talked her way into the dyslexic exam, and now she's going to go out and practice. And I was furious that we're going to have the same credential. I ran into her 5 years later. She was doing real estate. She was so happy. She was doing great. And the reason I bring this up is because, and this is something we complain about in our trade, so many people, they're not practicing 5 years out. Okay, for some, it's because they need more help, for sure. For some, it might not really be the right thing. And so to be able to come in at an entry level, spend some money, find out, do I like it? Do I not? Do I have aptitude? Do I want to keep doing it? I think it allows for a natural growth path. Whereas if you have to come in and then walk out years later as a doctor, oh man, now you're stuck.
There's this thing that happens in graduates is you're going through a program, you think that life is going to be a certain way, and then you start out and it's not that way. And you learn really fast, right? So there are some of our colleges that have taken on a model where, no, we want people to understand that you are going for a particular kind of position right away. I don't know that it works well with having to have your own clinics. And, in a school, that's a very expensive proposition to run your own clinic. And some of the things I see in recent conversations is the idea of, can we create this model where people actually get experience outside of the school clinic, and they actually have to count the cash at the end of the day. If you that sounds very analog. I don't know that anybody does that anymore, but just have their a real world sort of education in what it takes to stay in business.
You just said analog, and I think you're exactly spot on. Maybe you do have some cash to count, but at the end of the day, you have things that you have to do. There are boxes to tick. I would disagree with you that running an acupuncture practice is expensive. I think running an acupuncture practice is cheap. You need a room, you need a table, you need some needles. When I think about the overhead for many other professions, you need more capital investment. You don't need a lot of capital investment to run an acupuncture clinic. What you do need is some basic business skills. And if you didn't grow up in a family of business people, okay, you need to learn those, but they're really learnable skills.
What I meant to emphasize was that the college clinic setting is expensive, not a private practice. I think people can be, I've seen lots of private practices grow and flourish, but it takes effort all the time.
Yeah.
And it's the college clinics that are very expensive, and they often lose money. Like if you're having instructors and the infrastructure, and even if you usually should actually charge less for the appointments, because
of course,
it's a little inconvenient for a patient in a student clinic. It just is, why, if we can have a model where students can learn on the sites, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. There's also something you learn by just hanging out with someone who just knows the ropes.
Yes. have we been really good as a profession in building that mentorship? I think it's yes and no. There are a lot of people who give their time. There are a lot of people who that's their passion in having their practice is they want to give as much mentorship to others as possible, but we haven't done it in a structured way. And it hasn't really been the model of how we deliver education. So that might be an innovation in creating more realism for students and the check at early points that maybe I don't want to count the cash at the end of the day all the time in this way.
I want to come back to the schools for a moment. Hearing that, well, there's been some ups and downs. Interesting hearing about right after 9/11, there's a bump and that changed things. One of the bothersome things that I think many of us have experienced over the past few years, especially because if you love the profession, is watching and hearing about some of the major institutions evaporate like almost overnight.
Yeah, I've worked for more than one of them.
Oh, you're the person to talk to.
Well, yeah, not my fault.
What, Valerie, can you help us understand what's going on here? Or what has gone on? What's bringing this about? Because from the outside, I just look at it and go, oh man, that's scary. I mean, number one, it's frightening. And number two, how does that happen? Again, I'm not part of the institution. I'm not privy to what's on the inside. How is it that schools can go out of business so quickly? And beyond that, what are the factors at play that's bringing this about, and what can we do about it?
I think I would attribute it mostly to collapsing enrollment. If we once had 10,000 students in the pipeline and now we have 7,000 students or 6, and we had in the days when things were still sort of expanding, we went from 50 colleges to 65 colleges. At the same time that we were increasing the number of colleges that would open, the amount of people that wanted to come in was contracting. So if you had a larger institution that was highly dependent on enrollment and you usually brought in 50 students every year and you suddenly go to 25 students, you have a building and a staff and faculty, and just because you get less students doesn't mean you're not going to hold all the classes you're holding or all the clinics you're holding, or you have to pay the mortgage on the building. And so that's just that sort of building of infrastructure on a margin that's dependent on enrollment. And then when enrollment goes south, a lot of things go south. I'm sure in some pockets there were administrators that just didn't make very good sustainable business decisions, and that might have led to the closure of some colleges. But I'm watching some of our better institutions where people would, you get those surveys about what's the best acupuncture school in the country, and you name the top schools and they're out of business now.
Yes, I know. That's very bothersome.
So it's not about quality of education, right? It's not about what they were offering. I know I worked for OCOM. OCOM was located in a building where the value of the building collapsed because of the pandemic and because of the conditions in Portland. And who would want to go there? Because you would regularly see things that would make you feel unsafe. So we have cities that are in decay. It certainly seemed like a really good, sound financial decision to invest in a building that then grew equity, right? That's a thing that one would do, and you can't predict that a pandemic is going to come and administrations are going to come and fentanyl is going to come into your city, and then boom, there you're going to be.
There goes the real estate market, and there goes your investment that you thought would
Right.
carry you forward.
So I think what we're seeing is that we're building institutions in such a way that they cannot be flexible to changing conditions. Like if you have to deliver so many hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, and you have to have so much staff to support that, and you've got to house it with leases, or you build a building, or whatever it is that you do, suddenly you're creating an infrastructure that will not bend when the wind comes. And I think honestly that's what we're seeing. I don't think it's necessarily that people all mismanage things. I mean, I know people in schools that close that are some of the most decent human beings I know on the planet. And that wasn't the way that they manage things. And, we can but they can't stay open in business if the enrollment is collapsing. So some of this we may be seeing as a correction in the trajectory of the profession, and some of it may just be a collection of economics that are kind of unprecedented. I mean, I see all over the country that, as Americans, there are pockets where we're doing really well, but are we doing really as well as we were 10 years ago? I don't know. So it might be the economy.
Which is what you hear in every major election.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and economic conditions change. And like you were saying, there's times where it's really fertile. It's like summertime. Everything grows and it's growing fast, and you cannot expand fast enough in some ways. But there's always a fall, and there's always a winter, and there's always cycles of boom and bust. There's always cycles of expansion and contraction. Try taking an inhale for, more than a few seconds. You'll find out you need a contraction. All right, so there's that. We talked earlier about the Grad Plus loans and that it had a systemic effect on the industrial educational complex, so to speak. A period of expansion. There was money. And schools grew and overhead grew because you need more administrators with their specialized knowledge to be able to deliver the products. And look, all fair enough. But now we're really looking at that tap being turned off, and we're going to have to face that music. I understand there's lawsuits to attempt to keep that faucet open. Okay, if we do, there's the side of the ethics of, do we really want to saddle people with that kind of debt? Maybe we could talk about that for a moment. On the other side of it is, okay, the tap is shut off. How do we deal with that, given that we're used to an environment where the tap was open? So what's going to fill that gap? Do people get loans from banks? Do they go to private equity? Look, nature abhors a vacuum. Do schools just disappear? Do loans just disappear? Does something else come in? What are your thoughts?
I wish I knew. This is sort of a pressure point for me in not being able to see the future. What I see is, well, let me talk about a couple of things, because if we only see collapse, we're going to push other people under the water in order for us to get on the door. So if we're acting out of collapse and fear, what I get concerned about in our profession is they're going to make some really disastrous decisions that aren't going to serve us well as a profession and are going to have lasting effects. And of those things, the future that I see, I can't see the future when people are shouting at each other. And people have been hurt. I talked about 2 dupes. I think people are feeling that there are more of them and that they've been victim to them. I think that people feel in some ways that this is such a thing that anybody should have seen coming. I was around those tables a lot, and there wasn't like this secret conversation where we could see it coming and we just weren't telling anybody. It's whatever future we get out of this. So one of the things I see some resilience points, because if I look historically about as Chinese medicine as we practice it has now gone worldwide. Has it had periods of expansion and decline? Sure it has. And the way that practice is sort of like it has longevity through the worst times is to begin to express its value within the society in which it occurs. And I hope that as we move through it, and there's going to probably be more points of closure. And what's going to happen in the summer of 2028? We don't know, because we can't even predict what's going to happen politically. I mean, we saw a move that looked like Gainful employment was going to close all the schools in the early 2011, 2013. And, the political situation changed. They're expressing our value within the U.S. healthcare system is the number one job of our profession right now. Like, I think the profession as that one of those pillars has really got to get itself together and understand that this stuff is not going to happen if you're not making it happen. It doesn't happen on its own. I fear that sometimes when we have institutions, we build accrediting bodies and certifying bodies and all these colleges, that people come into a landscape where they think like it's all built for you. And I think the profession is actually going to need to get really savvy at promoting our value within the U.S. healthcare system. If it's private practice, that's fine. If it's community acupuncture, that's fine. If it's integrative practice, that's fine. But there are so big of gaps in U.S. healthcare that patients want our resilience. And so I think that's what we're going to have to build. And building resilience is going to have to mean a decided commitment to step away from opinion and start talking with other people who have ideas about how we create a path forward. I think one of the things that we have to be very cognizant of is that we have to maintain legal practice, legal routes of practice in the United States. I think that's really important. And I think that conversation around, well, will our certifying body always be there? Will our accreditation body always be there? That's not a given. If schools collapse, where's the money going to come from? Our certifying body is, their funding comes from new practitioners coming in the field.
Yes, without a certain critical mass.
Without a certain critical mass. This is sort of the big boogeyman in the closet.
I don't think the boogeyman's in the closet at this point.
No, it definitely out in the middle of the living room. So I think as a profession, we have to understand that making the kinds of connections now for our professional associations in our state legislatures to be able to respond should a collapse come is an important thing to do. I don't think we're necessarily so proactive, and we don't know how important that is. It's so important for a state association. I don't want to sound really rah-rah about this stuff, but state associations are our only conduit to not going to jail in the future. That's it.
Wait a minute. Please say that again, because it sounds really important.
Our state associations are our only conduit to keep us in legal practice. That's it. Like, where it matters, it's those conversations with a senator. It's showing up at the senator's picnic and actually carrying the coolers to the picnic. It's like putting the face of business into somebody's political office. Doesn't matter what party they are. Frankly, some inroads have been made under Republican administrations. Some inroads have been made under Democratic ones, but you have to, in your community, create those relationships with the people who can keep you legal. It's really important. And it is going to come at a cost. And when practices are, on a very thin margin and people are starting in practice, I completely understand why dues to a state association gets to be like the lowest priority on the list, but those dues pay for a lobbyist, and that lobbyist gets the ear of a legislator, and a single legislator may be the difference in creating the flexibility should our institutions not be able to carry us forward, and us being able to do it as a profession, sort of state by state. I'm not advocating for a deconstruction of our licensure. I just think that we when some of this settles out, we're going to have to maybe create some local autonomy where we thought we would just get it nationally. There's dupe number 3. I don't know. We created all these institutions so that we could have an even patchwork, and I feel in some ways that government policy is pulling that rug out from under us. They're doing it to nurses too. They're doing it to PTs too. It's across the board. we are getting swept up in that. But I think as a profession, we were already in a little more vulnerable place than these other professions because we're not totally in there.
Right. We're not a part of that conventional medicine club.
Right. They like our medicine. They are
Oh, yes,
seeing
they
now
do.
the benefits of what our medicine can do. They just don't necessarily warm up to the practitioners of that medicine.
Well, look, I think we have our own, how do I say it, complicity in the troubles that we have. We learn a very curious language about blood and qi and yin, and these are all very helpful for the work we do. It's extremely not useful when you're trying to talk to a civilian. In fact, it will work against you. And so there's a kind of bilingual capacity that I think we need that many of us don't have. And I think that has kept us a bit out of the club because, look, everyone likes someone who's a little bit interesting, but usually weird is not so favorable.
So the thing that turns that weird into, oh, this is an idea that they really know about, maybe I should listen to them, is a quality of professional humility. And when you're kind of fighting for your place, it's a little hard to not come on a little strong. And I completely understand that. I've lived it.
This is like dating.
This is a little bit like dating. You have to, you have to kind of, you have to understand the way that people can hear what you're saying, and well-knowledged kind of things in their language can actually open up a mind in a way that has some ripple effects down the road in a positive move for our profession that we can't even predict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your candor and humility and courage to speak to. You don't see what's coming. It's hard to know what's coming. It's this kind of a troubled time. I want to go talk about the other side of the debt question and the loan issue. You mentioned that there was a something about it wasn't right livelihood. What did you say earlier about 2011 and some kind of
Gainful employment.
gainful employment? Thank you. So really, we're looking at gainful employment again. This is a question that's come around again for good reasons, I suspect. You have student debt. A lot of people have student debt. I've talked to many people. They figure they'll have student debt the rest of their life, maybe because they're paying a certain minimum payment. On one hand, it's heartbreaking to think that people can't go to school and learn this medicine. On the other side of it, I think about people coming out with $200,000 or more of debt. And I wonder, it's like what are the ethics that we have that we allow that to happen?
Well, I would ask the question, who's allowing it to happen? Is it the lenders? Is it the school? Is it the lenders? Is it the government? Is it the student? I mean, I have some debt because did a doctoral program very late in my career. I did it specifically because I realized that sort of in my waning physical years, my mind is still sharp and I like teaching. And if I wanted to stay, as a viable faculty member, I really would need to get a doctorate. And it's not about practice, it's not about increasing skill. And so I did pursue that, and I have been able to maintain faculty positions. So the increased degree is doing exactly what I thought it would do for the exactly same reason. And I have to admit that the school that I got my debt from had some interesting practices, but I was not duped. This is not dupe number 4. So I was aware of what I was doing, and I was aware of why I was doing it. Am I completely aware of the impact it's going to have on the rest of my life? Well, a little bit.
Yeah, but look, fair enough. Who knows what any choice we make, what effect will it have on our
So
life?
your question about ethics, I have to ask, well, let's define what we assume the ethics are here. Like, is it unethical for a school to take students, or should they the thing is you're not legally allowed to stop people from taking out a lot of loans. You are legally barred from doing that. And you can steer them to the debt counseling and stuff, but that's highly regulated. And you cannot overstep as a college, or you're in violation of the law that allows you to give out loans. So it's a very complicated issue about, or should this. I sort of agree with some reform in the loans that as best as schools are able to do it, they should be following whether their graduates are in practice or not. Now, I've been on the end of creating those surveys and trying to reach out to graduates and finding out what they're doing, and they're not necessarily very responsive. And so you can find out about a certain percentage of your graduates, but the rest of your graduates are never going to respond to you again for whatever reason.
Right. There's not much you can do about that. So let me make sure I understand this, because I've heard people they talk to the loan counselor at the school and they're saying, hey, just don't worry about the debt. There's ways of paying it. Just don't worry.
I've heard that story too, and I've heard it enough that it has to be true. It was never true at any institution I worked at. So I think, and in fact, when I would interview people to come into the profession in 2000 to 2015, I was that person who would do a lot of interviews. I made it very clear in every interview that people should have to know that it's very expensive and that your ability to create, a viable practice is going to depend on your ability to have a business. Do you understand that? So I don't think that all loan officers are actually not giving people reflection about, okay, let's talk about what the loan means and let's talk about it's on down the road. I have heard that the loan officer kind of poo-pooed it. I've been on the receiving end of wanting to take out a loan and loan the financial aid office, not even really giving me a lot of detail about what that would mean and how much money it would be and how much I would be in debt. So I've been on the receiving end of that. And I think that there could be, are people meeting legal standards? Are they I don't know how to answer that question because I don't know what's true. And it would be helpful for us to know a little bit when we're having this discussion about what ethical practice is. Well, what is really true? How many of the loan officers are actually snowing people? And if they are, why isn't there some oversight over financial aid? That come down a lot from the feds so that doesn't happen. So that there's like one thing that everybody has to watch. I did jury duty a couple of years ago, and you come into a room with like 200 people and all of a sudden they're giving you a slideshow on implicit bias. I thought, this is awesome. If everybody's going to be a juror, this is stuff you need to know. Why isn't the government producing something that everybody has to go through so that everybody knows? And I think that it is incumbent on schools to have ethical practices when it comes to counseling people and distributing loans. I'm just not convinced that there's the degree that you hear about people being misled. I don't honestly know what that situation is. I think getting good information about that would be critical to answering your questions about what are the ethics. Because if it's a widespread practice to poo-poo it and it's okay and don't worry about it, I don't think I could see in certain places and times that might have been the way people operated, but I can't see. I've been to a lot of institutions and kind of had to ask those probing questions, and I'm not seeing that as a widespread landscape.
Okay. And yeah, look, education is expensive. I think that's true anywhere. So there's that, especially at the graduate level. The thing I was wondering about with that is, or have you seen in your experience people being counseled to some degree about, you're going to get this loan, it's this much interest, and when you get out, here's what it actually looks like, much like you would get a mortgage on a house, and they're going to do some sort of disclosure that says, here's your principal, here's your interest, here's what you'll be paying.
I think, and it's been more than 10 years since I took out a loan. But I think actually the federal government walks you through that when you're applying. I think once,
Mm.
you do kind of get that. I think that maybe the structure of student loans is so much different than the structure of other loans, and the patchwork of having grad plus this and some subsidized and unsubsidized, like being able to, it's like looking at a phone bill and trying to figure out what you're actually paying for. It's like this thing where, okay, so how much is my data? I don't even know. You get some counseling, but it's not really clear that then when you get out of practice and it compounds daily, that the amount of interest that gets accrued is like bad. It's like another house you can't live in. So I completely understand the problem, and I I just I I really wish that the government was gonna create a program that they would also create the controls and the brakes around the program so that people are safe when they come into the program.
Mm.
And that's where I think the ethics lie.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's wow. Well, thank you for that because it opens up my thinking in a number of different ways that I hadn't considered. So I appreciate that. Valerie, wow, we've already gone an hour and a half. I meant to keep you for an hour. I apologize.
We're having fun.
Well, honestly, I would say I am having fun talking with you. I really appreciate being able to have this kind of a conversation in a moment where there's a lot of uncertainty, a huge amount of change, and to be able to sit down with you and the other folks that I've sat down with, different people, different perspectives, we're all looking at this thing that's maybe a little hard to name. And the main thing that I take away, Valerie, is everyone I've talked to, they love this profession. They care about it. They care about their patients. They care about new people coming in. They want to see this thing continue. Do we have differences of opinion? Of course we do. We're acupuncturists. Good God.
Mhm.
Acupuncturists are famous for arguing with each other, but maybe it's just that people in general, we have different ideas. We have similar goals and different ways of thinking about how we're going to get there.
We do. I would say that this is an opportunity. There was a big opportunity during the pandemic to learn that we could actually provide education over distance. That was not a thing we knew before the pandemic. So there are opportunities that come up from outside forces that give us an idea that we can be more flexible than we think we can. In this particular crisis, I think that we need to do some really deep listening to each other and not shouting of our opinions. And I get that, this is a very scary situation. And so we really want to have a strategy and come out of it and be right. And I think that's not going to serve us very well. I think we really have to cultivate the deepest thinkers that we've got in our profession. I think we have to cultivate a number of them because not any one person is going to have the right idea. It's going to be by civil discourse with each other and active listening and coming from everybody else's viewpoint as equally valid to your own at the core, that we're going to be able to hear the kind of innovations that is going to spark a path out of this. And so my hope for my profession is that we can not retreat to our corners, but kind of be able to approach other ideas with trying to find what value is in each one of them that can move us forward. And I think that is going to carve our way out.
That sounds optimistic.
It does, but
It sounds, and I don't mean optimistic in a bad way. It sounds optimistic as in plausible, doable. I think we have the skills. I know we all have a love of medicine.
yeah,
So there's that. Look, we have lots of differences of opinion, but yes, there are things that unite us as well. And all the things that you just spoke, I think we're capable of it. I
I think
really do.
I do too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I see all these efforts. I see this kind of conversation popping up everywhere, and I just think that if I were a practitioner, having my practice, I would just try to keep my ear to the ground a little bit more. And not that people aren't. I think people are, but I would, now is a time to actually open up the newsletter from somebody and read it. And, to when there's a town hall put on somewhere, attend it, get informed.
And support your state association.
I don't want to be a rah-rah cheerleader behind it, but they fundamentally are the way that we're going to be able to protect our profession. And, it is crunch time now. And so we have to support them, even if it's just by paying dues or being on the Zoom call. If people have the capability and the desire and the passion to volunteer some time, now's the time.
Now's the time. Okay. Valerie, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and your heart and everything that you've had to share today. I really appreciate it.
Right back at you, Michael, for creating this venue, for letting people hear a lot of different voices. It's really important.
I think so too. Well, until next time then.
Okay.
As I reflect on this conversation, what stands out to me wasn't simply the discussion about accreditation, student loans, doctoral education, or declining enrollment. It was the reminder that professions, like living systems, are constantly adapting to the changing conditions. The questions raised here don't have simple answers. How much education is enough? What do we do to make this medicine accessible to future practitioners without burdening them with unsustainable debt? What does integration into the healthcare system actually mean? And what about those practitioners who enjoy the practice of acupuncture because it is outside of mainstream medicine? These are questions that are not so easily answered. What I appreciate about Valerie's perspective is her willingness not to look away from the problems, recognize the value of the institutions we have and how they are counted amongst the pillars that support the profession, and at the same time, see that due to multiple factors, we are in a moment of difficulty that requires us to find ways to protect our licenses and redefine our profession in light of the new environment in which we find ourselves. As she said, we can deconstruct or innovate. I think she's right that this is a time to listen more deeply, think more creatively, and explore new possibilities for how we can educate, practice, and perhaps most importantly, support one another.